Okay, we are live.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I am Chair Sage Turner, and I'd like to welcome you to the December 6th Housing and Community Development Committee meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually today. For those of you out there with us, welcome. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of our city website. You also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. To do so, you can call 855-925-2801. And when prompted, there's a meeting code number 9791. For today's meeting, we also have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. It's a similar process. You'll call in, use the same number, 855-925-2801. And again, meeting code 9791. At that time, you will hear the meeting live, and you will also hear a recording of "For more options, please press star." At that time, you will press star 3, and that will get you into the comment queue. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. As a general reminder, please remain on mute. And if you have something to say or speak up, you can virtually raise your hand or visually, and I will call upon you. And if at all possible, please refrain from using a chat function. Not everyone can see it in real time. All right, I'm going to go through roll call and introduce our committee members, staff who are participating virtually today. Council members, as I say your name, please say a quick hello. Vice Mayor Smith.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councilwoman Mosley.
Good morning.
Good morning. Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Community Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good morning.
Affordable Housing Officer Sasha Bertinsky.
Good morning.
And do we have, oh yeah, we do. And Economic Development Specialist Rachel Taylor.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, we are on to the first item of the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes. Did everyone get a chance to look at the action minutes from November 15th? If no comments or questions, may I get a motion?
I move that the minutes be accepted as presented.
Second.
Thank you. And because we're virtual, we'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Sage Turner, myself, aye. All right, item number 1 is complete. We have approved the minutes. Item number 2, Housing Trust Fund Policy Revisions, an exciting one. And I believe we have Sasha Bertinsky to run us through it. Sasha, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman Turner. I believe Katie will be sharing that presentation.
Yes, just one moment. We are having technical difficulties on the YouTube side. Just one moment.
Okay. If you're listening at home, you can go to the city's website or simply Google HCD Committee Asheville, and you will find our webpage. And all of the documents we're referring to today will be listed under today's meeting date. Oops. Looks like Janice Ashley has joined us as well. Welcome, Janice.
Good morning, everyone.
We're having a little delay with the YouTube, so we're just paused for a minute.
Sorry about that. We'll be done in just a second. We're almost done. Okay, sorry for the delay. We are good to go. I'm going to pull up Sasha's presentation and we're good.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Again, we're on item number 2.
Great. Thanks, Katie. So we're here before you today to discuss some revisions to the Housing Trust Fund policy. Next. These are headed to council next week. And so just our key takeaways here really quickly at the beginning. The Housing Trust Fund was established in 2000. Currently, we have approximately $7.65 million available in the, for loans and grants. Staff is proposing Housing Trust Fund policy revisions to respond to the current market conditions, make the policy more dynamic so it can respond to market conditions, align with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and adjust the scoring criteria to correspond with community priorities. We're aligning this process with the Buncombe County funding cycle, and I'll talk about that schedule a little bit later, which will help us with decision making and provide a little more predictability to the development community. We're seeking your recommendation to City Council for next week's council meeting, and there are future revisions that we want to look at in 2023. So this is a somewhat more limited scope of policy revisions. We really were going after the big nuggets that we wanted to make sure got changed. Next. So just as some background, again, it was established in June of 2000. It was a tool to increase the availability of affordable housing in our community. It previously had an annual cycle, but evolved over time to be on rolling basis. Through the budget process, currently $500,000 is approved every year to support the fund. During the bond period, which we're still in, $5 million was allocated to the Housing Trust Fund. And just recently, City Council appropriated another $6 million of the remaining bond funds to the Housing Trust Fund in October. Between 2001 and 2019, looking back at the records, the Housing Trust Fund has loaned out approximately $15 million and produced 1,300 units, which is about a subsidy of around $11,500 per unit. Next. So you all have seen these before, but just really quickly, this is a list of the eligible uses. It's a fairly flexible fund. It allows for the construction of sale or rental, land acquisition, hard costs, conversion or adaptive reuse of existing non-residential structures, purchase and rehab of existing substandard multifamily housing units, and purchase and rehab or conversion of market rate multifamily developments for affordable housing. Also, manufactured housing and modular construction are also included in this policy, and down payment assistance loans, as long as loans are not forgiven. So that's the current state of the policy. Next. So some other restrictions in that policy, housing trust funds are not available for individuals seeking to build or renovate their own home. A minimum of 20% of all the units must be affordable for the proposed development. Affordable units that have been pledged to the city in exchange for a density bonus or conditional zoning or other special consideration will be ineligible. That's in the policy today. It also restricts rehab of single family homes and duplexes, and projects must be located within the city of Asheville limits. That wouldn't change. And pre-development expenses are not an eligible use. Next. So why are we trying to do these policy revisions now? Currently, we have funding caps in place that because they're attached to a specific number, they can't fluctuate with the market. We've seen such a huge increase in construction costs, financing, that costs of development are just really skyrocketing right now. We also wanted to add some additional underwriting criteria to help staff evaluate proposed projects. We wanted to align some of our requirements with NCHFA. The North Carolina Housing Finance Agency is the agency that's in charge of low-income tax credits. So we definitely have a number of projects that come to both the city and NCHFA for funding. When we have different requirements than NCHFA, we're looking at different numbers, and that doesn't make sense. We should just use the same numbers and have the same assumptions. And then again, we want to align city applications with the county cycle with a call for applications in December, later this month. Next. So here's our proposed schedule. This is not officially a part of the policy. This is an operational thing, but this is what we are, working from. In approximately 2 weeks or possibly less, we will put out a call for applications. We will have an applications deadline in February. There will be an initial review by HCD in March, with final recommendations from HCD in April, and then going to the second council meeting in April for final funding decisions. And this is very close to the county's schedule as well. Next. So this is our process for the policy revisions. You all saw this at your last meeting. AHAC, our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, has seen this at 2 meetings. We just spent a number of hours last Thursday on this. And so again, after today, this would go forward to City Council. Next. So here are the big pieces of the policy changes. The number one thing is removing the $1 million cap on requests. This is a cap that 7 out of the 11 applications, last 11 applications that have been approved over the last 4 years have been over $1 million. So clearly there's a trend. Instead, we are proposing using 10% of total estimated project costs, which as costs increase, that also increases. Buncombe County uses this standard for non-4% tax credit projects. So they do allow for a higher percentage if you're doing a 4% tax credit project, but otherwise for all other projects, it's at 10%. This would allow us to be more responsive to fluctuating market conditions. And based on recent applications, I think it's pretty generous. And even in some future ones where we're seeing cost come up, I think 10% still gets us where we need to be. We also want to remove the existing per unit subsidy cap, which currently is $20,000 per unit. We've kind of blown past that in the market. That's not realistic and not really doable. It is occasionally doable for some bigger projects that are tax credits and they have many layers of funding. But even then, I think we're going to see that's going to be difficult for developers to get to. We still will be calculating that and looking at that number, and council will know about that number, because if we're looking at a number of applications, we want to be able to just look at, kind of compare them, even though sometimes you're comparing apples to oranges in different projects, but it's good to understand that. And it's a measure of city investment. Next. Also, we've added income averaging as an option under the affordability definition. This aligns with NCHFA, which allows that for tax credit projects. It helps get income diversity within a project. So instead of just saying everything has to be under 60%, if you're doing income averaging, you can have some at 30%, maybe some at 50, maybe some at 80, those kinds of things. So we can get some lower area median income households into those developments. We are recommending some changes to the scoring criteria, which I'll go over in a future slide. And we've also added some additional underwriting criteria to help evaluate projects. Next. So November 3rd, AHAC met and looked at the policy. And these are, you saw these last month. There was some concern around an annual funding cycle. We're looking at having a second opportunity later in the year. The policy does not dictate the schedule. It does not limit it or say it has to be an annual. So we won't have to revise the policy if we change any of that. The scoring rubric favors larger projects was one concerned voice, and that is true. The scoring rubric, however, is not like the ultimate decision factor. It's one factor that's being weighed in the decision. It doesn't prevent council from funding smaller projects. And we have talked with AHAC at length, and Janice is here as well to talk about legal limits on the area median income. We clarified the policy around home ownership and left it at 100% AMI, but we're sticking with the 80% of area median income for rental units. Next. AHAC also discussed their role in providing preliminary project funding recommendations to you all. It was a mix of opinions. There was not necessarily agreement on that issue. They did not talk about this at their retreat last week, and it was not a part of their motion. I think just with all the different issues, it didn't rise to the top, I guess, to really to hash it out. I think we have always taken, I try to keep them updated, and if they have comments on applications, I'm happy to bring those forward to you all. So next. At your last committee meeting on November 15th, there were a number of issues that were brought up and discussed. And some of these are going to come up in our later recommendations, discussion about vouchers, acceptance versus setting aside units, potential second round again, AHAC's role in the process, and also a discussion about is there a way to reach some lower area median income households to help in areas that were affected by urban renewal, and a discussion of the bedroom mix, which we will also talk about in a minute. Next. So last Thursday, AHAC had a very long discussion and really spent the majority of the time discussing the scoring rubric. And I think these are kind of the themes of their discussion that the scoring rubric has some room for improvement. They really wanted to spend more time on it later in 2023 and really kind of dig into it and make further recommendations to make it better. They felt like there needed to be more. We do need more data. I think we're all on the same page of that. There's some things we need some more data around. They also wanted community input around equitable economic development and things like that, so that it's not just them. They really want to, work with the public or in partners to get some other points of view in there. And I think there was a widespread recognition that the level of subsidy needed for affordable housing is substantial. And so if we're looking to serve lower area median income folks or permanent affordability, that takes a higher subsidy. Next. So this is their approved motion. Basically, they supported the text amendments to the policy. They were advocating for the highest subsidy cap feasible, meaning going beyond the 10% as currently written. They also recommended some changes to the scoring rubric with these following provisions, removing the per unit subsidy, but still included as a point of information. Change the bonus points for housing choice vouchers to for setting aside units, you get the bonus points. And they committed as committee to do this comprehensive review of the scoring rubric to discuss more robust changes and remove the number of bedrooms from the scoring matrix. But like the per unit subsidy, have it as a point of information. And I will say that we made all of these changes in our recommendations, so they're reflected in what's before you today. Next. So to that point, here's the scoring criteria. We just cut and pasted the pieces that we're changing. We're leaving everything else the same. The number of bedrooms is one of those things where we really need some more data. I think it's still one bedrooms are still a very much needed thing in our community. It's not going away. Someone at the meeting said that from their experience, and so this is anecdotal, 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms are the hardest to find. That 2 bedrooms, folks looking for 2 bedroom units usually don't have a problem. It's the 1s and the 3s. Again, I don't have hard data to back that up. Per unit subsidy, taking that out, and then the bonus points for setting aside units for housing choice vouchers. Next. So this is just a summary of our recommendation, hitting all of those points of the 1 million cap, removing the 1 million cap, removing the existing subsidy per unit subsidy cap. Things I haven't talked about, but we're kind of adding back in, or not back in, but rehabilitation of single family homes and duplexes could be an allowable use. We have like a minimum project size of 4 units. It's not like just 1 or 2, but you really have to be doing a little bit more substantial work. But we have some smaller, nonprofits that might be something they want to do. Income averaging, again, we talked about pro forma requirements and then the scoring rubric. So that's basically the summary of all the changes that we're recommending. Next. So in the future, we are, the committee has expressed an interest in looking at these other pieces. And so staff is working this into our work plan for next year, looking at a site readiness program, down payment assistance, land acquisition, and I think in previously redlined areas, goals for reaching lower AMIs in previously redlined areas, voucher set-asides. Even though we've worked part of that into the scoring requirements, I think there's still that question out there about requiring those set-asides. And so we would like to make those future policy revisions using updated data, such as an updated housing needs assessment, also stakeholder engagement and public input. And we will be bringing recommendations back to this committee in spring and summer. I hate to say the word spring, but late spring, summer 2023. Next, Katie. And these are just our key takeaways again. I'm not going to reread them, but it's kind of everything I've said before. But I think that's the last slide, and happy to answer any questions. And Kevin Lynn is here also, our affordable housing specialist who helped a lot with all the underwriting requirements and policy revisions. So
Thank you, Sasha. Tremendous work and rapid fire. I appreciate all the input added from AHAC as well. Very helpful. Councilwoman, Vice Mayor, do you have any questions or comments at this time? I can't, with the presentation up, y'all are tiny on my screen. Are y'all okay? I just had a couple. So I think I understood. We are saying that this is about the 100% AMI versus 80. So the 100% will remain with the homeowner opportunity because the HUD allows that, but the 80 is a state statute, right? And that's right.
yes and no. So, and I don't know if Janice wants to pipe in here, but basically the statutes reference low and moderate income. And if we use the HUD definitions of low and moderate income, that's 60% and 80% AMI. I feel like we looked at all the major cities in North Carolina, and they all use that 80% standard for rental. I think we did discuss, if a person came to you all or came to the city with a proposal for a project where they had 20% of their units at 50% AMI, let's say, and then they were going to do another section of housing from 80 to 100 or 80 to 120, that's still doable. The minimum is just we need at least 20% at 80% or below. So it's just, it's a matter of like, I think the discussion was like, well, do you count the subsidy for those other units, 80 to 120, or, you know what I mean, how you look at it. I feel pretty strongly about 80% and below myself, just because there's so much need for lower income.
Councilwoman Mosley?
And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I also believe that part of the reasoning behind removing the per unit subsidy was the understanding that in order to get lower AMIs, necessarily the subsidy would be higher. So the thought is, while we would prefer lower ones if we're going to suggest 80 and 60, we don't want to inadvertently preclude the development of lower AMIs. So that was the reasoning behind removing the per unit subsidy that we have in the current policy. So it's kind of tied in.
I think so. I think it's also becoming just really hard even to do just the 80% for, with a $20,000 per unit. So, but yeah, I think that it strengthens the case for sure.
Agreed. I was reading the draft document that has all the language, marked out and added. And I'm looking at page 6, the loan structure. We didn't kind of see in the slides, but I'm really thankful for some of these changes about second lien positions, first mortgage lender, and all these other subordinate lending partners. I think these are good additions so that in the event, here's one of them, in the event that Asheville Housing Trust Fund is providing the most subordinate mortgage funds, requests for additional financing in the event of unforeseen costs or budgeted cost overruns shall be first requested from lenders in lower lien positions or equity syndicators. And I think that's a helpful thing. We've run into this a couple times, and I don't remember where I saw it in this document, but also the idea that if we're going to have a second application period, if an applicant is in the first and the second, that we would merge their applications as if they were one. I think that's also helpful. Great work on this, staff. I mean, this is very thorough. And I encourage any of you at home listening, if you want more detail, this version of the draft with changes right in the document is really helpful to follow along. I don't have any more questions, really just appreciations. I do wonder, just generally speaking, we've had this, as we've been bringing these issues to light, we've said, well, we're doing this because we keep allowing exceptions to our policy. So here we are adopting more policies to help address some of that. Do we need to consider looking at like a process, an established process, if you're not going to be able to meet these terms, what you then do or anything? Or are we just going to take that as we are? So what if some applicants ask for things outside this? We'll just weigh it live in a meeting. I mean, do we want to establish a process? Has anyone thought about that?
I don't know that we'd want to establish additional processes. I think there will be exceptions. Unfortunately, that's just the hard part of being in government. And we're trying to capture something that will fit, most, but there will be some exceptions, I think. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, I expect some. I just wonder if we want to establish a process for that, but it just feels so like, okay, so we'll just take it as it comes. And some of that makes me feel a little less predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And Councilmember Turner, if I may, part of the benefit of being able to look at multiple different applications at the same time for this first cycle is we'll get to have a better feel for the types of nuances that we might need to consider. And looking at them all at once, we can consider, do we really need to have a process change, or is this something that HCD and City Council wants to consider on a case-by-case basis? So my recommendation would be aligned with what Sasha just said. Let's kind of get through this first round of applications, and based on that experience, we can formalize things if we do see some patterns where we're needing to have a formalized process for specific types of exceptions.
That's a great point. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me too, I wanted to make sure to thank Kevin because we've also added this pro forma requirement. So for those of you listening at home, we'll get these applications, but we won't have the whole broad picture of the financing for the project available to us all the time. Sometimes it's volunteer, but we're adding that requirement. So to apply for this, you will submit your pro forma. And I think that's partly because Kevin has joined us and has that expertise. So thank you, Kevin. That's all the questions or comments from me on this item. Anything else from Councilwoman? Okay, do you actually need action to move this to council, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make a motion to move the policy revisions to the Housing Trust Fund forward to full council.
Second.
Great, and because we're virtual, we'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for all of your efforts on this. That feels great. And for those of you listening at home, we're now moving on to item number 2. Let's see if I still have it up. Yes. I'm sorry. Item number 3, strategic partnership funding status update. And I think Rachel Taylor is with us to discuss that with us. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. All right, so I'm here to provide an update on the pilot the launch of the pilot SPF program and some lessons learned and next steps. So next slide, please. So the three things we want to do today are to reaffirm the scope. So the revised focus of the Strategic Partnership Grant Program is to eliminate the opportunity gap in Asheville for low to moderate income school-aged youth. We'll also provide a status update on the pilot. So the grant program relaunched with a pilot in the summer of 2022 after about a 3-year pause. This relaunch resulted in several key revisions, including a refined grant program scope, as described above, the establishment of a $20,000 award minimum, a streamlined application process, and the inclusion of an Asheville City Schools representative on the evaluation panel. So in July of 22, City Council awarded 9 pilot grants to nonprofit organizations totaling $375,500. And then finally, we'll talk through next steps for this program. We want to continue to operate the grant cycle while implementing improvements. We'll also, this is moving to a new committee, so we'll present updates to the Equity and Engagement Committee starting in January. And we also want to launch the next application period in February of 23. So next slide. So now I'll give a little bit of a background of the program. Next slide, please. So historically, the Strategic Partnership Program has lacked a dedicated organizational and operational framework. And this has caused some constrained program management and operations that kind of partially led to that pause. It has also impacted relationships with nonprofits in our community due to prior experience with the program and some inefficiencies. So when the program relaunched in 22, it started with a fund balance of $711,000. It had, because it hadn't been dispersed in several years, that balance was allowed to grow. So as I mentioned, in July, Council awarded 9 awards, and the remaining total fund, assuming that all of those awards are dispersed this year, will be $335,500. And so we anticipate it has received an annual budget allocation, assuming that continues. That annual allocation is $242,000. So our anticipated program balance for fiscal year 23-24 is just under $600,000. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility as far as the awards that we want to offer. We also want to continue to look into multi-year awards. So we'll talk through some of that in a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight that this program has got a little bit more wiggle room, so to speak, than it has in the past. So next slide. So here's a list of the organizations that were awarded. You can see their requested amounts and their award amounts. And so we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the median award amount was $36,000, and the median requested amount was $50,000. So we'll talk through some of that in our pilot data. Next slide. So the goal of the pilot program were threefold. First, to reduce the burden on organizations during and after the application process. We also wanted to issue grants into the community after that 3-year pause. And we also wanted to provide funding at amounts to allow organizations to positively impact their target service groups. So some key revisions that occurred with that pilot program were that the program scope was refined and confirmed, and those projects funded activities to close the opportunity gap for school-aged children in Asheville. I mentioned the award minimum that was established, and then also expanding the evaluation panel to include subject matter experts. Another few items that happened were that the application process was able to be conducted online, and staff also held an information session for applicants. This was not required, however, it was recorded and posted online, and staff also compiled a frequently asked questions document, which was also posted online. And then finally, through the agreement process, the pilot introduced grantee-informed reporting requirements to reduce administrative burdens. Next slide. So for the eligibility criteria in the pilot, applicants must have been certified nonprofit organizations. They also had the option of working with a fiscal agent. The award minimum was $20,000 per program. I should note that we didn't receive any applications that were below this amount, but this was the minimum that we recommended. And the pilot program considered activities that needed to address the opportunity gap for school-aged youth in one of three categories: so education, community and social context, and neighborhood and physical environment. I wanted to highlight those three because it was pretty clear in the feedback that these categories were fairly broad, and so there's an opportunity for some refinement and revisions in that area. Next slide. So now I want to kind of talk through some of the legal framework and context and how that relates to the scope. Next slide. So this grant program is governed by the Community Development Statute. This allows municipalities to disperse funds to support community development activities that serve a public purpose that the city would otherwise be able to provide, and that the persons served are of low to moderate income. And in section A2, it highlights the different types of activities that can be funded. So really focusing on programs concerned with employment, economic development, crime prevention, child care, health, drug abuse, education, welfare needs of persons of low and moderate income. So as I mentioned, this really informs the parameters of the grant program and the scope. So as we continue our recommendations and our revisions of this program, these are our parameters that we'll work with them. Next slide. So with that, I'd like the committee's affirmation on the scope. It's fairly similar, but it says that the revised focus of the Strategic Partnership Grant Program is to eliminate the opportunity gap in Asheville for children and students ages K through 12 of low and moderate incomes. And this focus area is in alignment with Asheville City Council's priorities of an equitable and diverse community and a thriving local economy by eliminating disparities in our school system, increasing access to quality schools and other educational resources, and fostering economic mobility. Next slide. So now we'll dive into some data and status updates of the pilot grant. Next slide. So first I want to talk through some of the feedback. After the application period, staff sent a survey to all 31 applicants. We received 11 written responses and a request from 3 respondents for follow-up meetings. Staff also solicited feedback from the evaluation panel and support staff across the different departments. And a couple of key themes that came forward were that the application period was short, and that was challenging for both applicants and staff. That there could be an opportunity to clarify the evaluation process and include more subject matter experts. And also the award minimum was helpful, but feedback suggested that the minimum amount, award amount could increase. Next slide. So that application period was 20 days. As I mentioned earlier, staff held one information session that was recorded and created a frequently asked questions document, both of which were posted online. And also staff held one presentation session in which applicants had the opportunity to present to both this committee and the evaluation panel. The program received 31 applications, of which 9 were awarded. The total requested amount for these funds were just under $2 million, and the awarded amount was $375,500. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, the median requested amount was $50,000, and the median awarded amount was $36,000. Next slide. And so to date, of the 9 grants awarded, we have 7 fully executed agreements. So that has to happen before we're able to disperse funds. We're soon to have 8. And of the 9, we've got 9 recipients who have received at least 1 initial payment, soon to have 6. And the awards dispersed today are just under $70,000. And the amount of scheduled payments remaining are just under $170,000. So together, the percentage of payments disbursed and regular payments is 63%. So we do have some work to do to get folks back on schedule, but for the most part, we're on track with that. Next slide. So here's where we really saw a lot of some need for improvement. So I want to talk through some of the steps. Try not to get too bogged down, but there's some room for improvement in the next grant cycle. So the time from receipt of grant application to award notification, we sent a notification to all applicants of their status just after council voted on the awards. So that was 15 to 35 days, depending on when the application was submitted. And the median days for an agreement to be fully executed was 91. We definitely have some opportunities to shorten that time frame. However, the median days from notification to first disbursement were only 98. So that's showing us that the bulk of that time is really happening in that agreement execution and development phase, but we're able to move quickly once that's totally done. So the steps required to disburse an award payment are 20 to 25. It's a little loose because sometimes the steps can be combined. And of those steps, roughly 10 steps or documents are required for recipients. One of our recommendations is to only ask for some of that key information one time and really improve the application process to be able to directly translate information from the application into the agreement development. So that way those steps can be dramatically reduced and the timeline to disbursement can be reduced as well. The median days to complete the steps and or receive the completed required documents were 60 days, and the median number of interactions with each grantee were 30, so that's calls, emails, meetings. So moving forward, we really want to focus on streamlining how we ask for information and how we translate that information into steps that we require as a city, and also improving the quality of interactions with not only grantees, but applicants as well. Next slide. So our long-term recommendations, next slide, are to lengthen the application period to 2 to 3 months. So with a longer application period, we can have more communication materials and really front load a lot of the questions and things that kind of slow down the process on the back end. We can work on that on the front end with a longer application period. We also want to improve communication and information sharing throughout the grant cycle. I mentioned we definitely want to front load some of that information, but we want to continue those touch points throughout the entire life of the grant. We want to streamline the application process. We can refine the activity categories and the evaluation process. As I mentioned, really honing in on asking for that basic information one time across all steps. And then fully funding awards instead of partial funding. Partial funding has led to a little bit of back and forth. It also is difficult for applicants to kind of account for. And so it not only slowed down the process, but also led to a little bit of some pain points around, okay, where's this other funding going to come from? And so we also want to develop long-term program improvements to create a positive and lasting impact. This pilot program was extremely helpful because we were able to gather that cycle time data of how long we're able to, or how quickly we're able to return a specific document. We want to continue to implement that baseline monitoring of grantee activities and performance evaluation. I mentioned the pilot program used grantee-informed reporting requirements. We haven't gotten enough of those back yet to really make a recommendation on those. So we want to continue to collect that information and see how that can be refined in the future. We also want to assess the options to reallocate awards in the event an agreement is not fully executed or is canceled. This is, I think, a key step in considering the options to award multi-year grants. So if for whatever reason an award doesn't get to a fully executed agreement, or if an agreement has to be canceled for whatever reason, we want to make sure we've got steps to be able to move quickly and get that money back into the community with another organization. So next slide. So our steps for this grant process moving forward we're working on updating materials and developing additional communication materials. In January, we will provide an update and an introduction to the newly formed Equity and Engagement Committee. And so then January through March, we will have the evaluation and application period open. And then February through March, on the back end, staff will do some pre-work to really update those draft agreements and streamline those processes as well. Then March and April, we'll present award recommendations to the new committee for a vote of approval. We anticipate in April presenting those recommendations to City Council for a vote and confirming the awards. So April and May, again, really hoping to streamline that time frame and finalize the agreements and encumber funds and anticipate dispersing funds in June of 2024. 23. Those years are off. I just realized that. So not in June of 2024, June of 23, next year, there will be no pause in grant funding. We'll be able to disperse payments to recipients with fully executed agreements, and they'll be able to submit their initial invoices. And I think that's it. Katie, next slide. So again, here are the key takeaways, highlighting some reforms that the grant program implemented, the pilot, reaffirming the scope. And with that, I will take your questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that extensive update and summary. Councilwoman, any questions, comments for Rachel?
From your feedback that you got from applicants, they mentioned that they would like more subject matter experts on the equity and engagement team. Could you give me some more information on what that conversation was like?
So from the survey, applicants indicated, respondents indicated that they would like to see more subject matter experts that are familiar with some of, I call them like squishier topics. So some of that social emotional understanding. The eligibility categories were extremely broad. And so I think that led to a wide array of types of applications that we saw. The applications that tended to score higher and that were ultimately awarded really centered on education and kind of elements that it's natural that we can kind of clearly see, things like grades, things like that. So having additional subject matter experts that can help us really refine and understand those elements that aren't as kind of numbers oriented.
Thank you. Antoinette, any questions? Okay, great. And do you need action from us today?
No official action. We just wanted to affirm that scope, specifically adding the low and moderate income element, was in line with this committee's vision.
Great. Well, it sounds like you got the feedback you need, and great. Thank you for being with us today, Rachel. All right. Well, that concludes item number 3 on our agenda, leaving only item number 4, public comment. We did receive one email ahead related to the HTF. Thank you, Greg Borum, for constantly reminding us that we need family size units. And do we have anybody on the line? Katie?
No, we do not.
Okay. Wonderful. We have had a quick meeting today, but a thorough policy and summary one. So I appreciate staff's effort on this one. And if there's nothing from my colleagues, then I believe we can adjourn. Okay, great. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.